And from that point, did you feel that your career then propelled itself more towards screenwriting, or was there a period where there was parallels? You were doing both.
Well, it certainly was a crossover period. I was writing my second novel, and this was a point in time when that little online bookshop called Amazon started to really change the landscape irrevocably.
Mm.
And these giant bookstores just started to close their doors,
Mm.
and everything became, PDFs instead of, hard copies.
Mm.
And maybe it was fortuitous, maybe it wasn't, but um, connections I had from my old documentary days with SBS. One of them was working for a local production company that just needed an extra story brain in the room while they were bouncing some ideas around. So I went into this company and I sat for a couple of days and I offered my thoughts on these projects, none of which seemed particularly good, but then they were TV and it was fresh and interesting to me.
Yeah.
And I had an idea. I had an idea for a show, and I there was a gentleman who was the new head of story at this company, whose name's Lee McGrath, and I said, and he and I just seemed to get on really well. We had a language that connected through, Raiders of the Lost Ark and Jaws, and these classic films that we both seemed to love, and everyone else seemed to think was a little bit bubblegum. So I said, I've got this idea for a show. And I sent him, I wrote a one pager, and he said, this is pretty good. He said, let's run this. I know the head of drama at 10. Let's run it past them. And so ran it past 10. And then they said, we'd like to see, the pilot script. So they commissioned the pilot script and I wrote that. And they said, okay, let's make this. And that became a show called Secrets and Lies, which was made here in Brisbane, which was delightful to see that happen on screen, because there's not a lot of shows, or there certainly weren't at that point, where you saw Brisbane for Brisbane on screen.
Yeah, yeah.
We had production going on here even in the late 80s. We had Mission Impossible and lots of stuff shooting down the coast and fast, but not Brisbane as Brisbane. And so to actually film a Brisbane story was really delightful to see. And it did get remade in the US, as Jack said earlier, by their ABC network, and I had no hand in that. They turned a 6 by 1 hour into a 10 by 1 hour. So where they found the extra 4 hours of story, I don't know, because I thought it was a bit fat anyway. But that kind of opened a presence in the US, and through that, several other projects manifested. Some never saw the light of day, but I got paid, well, what I thought was reasonably handsomely to write some pilot scripts with American dollars, and also it opened the doors with ABC Disney over there when that was acquired, who became the primary economic force behind a show called Harrow, which lasted for a few seasons here, and that was a lot of fun. And so now I find myself very much in TV land, in the midst now of developing another crime show for an Australian network, which Jack has read the pilot of, and some other projects around the world with some UK producers and an American studio. But my first love is very much, standing in the moors and calling my name, wanting to be let in, novel writing. So I actually have started another novel, which is a delightful indulgence that I really can't afford right now, but I want to, because it's different. It's different writing.
Are you going to do it? Sorry, are you going to do a sequel to The Broken Ones? Because it did seem as if you pitched up as a potential.
It was a great departure from the first novel to write something, a semi-dystopian detective novel with ghosts in it. Not something.
Lots of layers.
Yeah, and a bit of Mesopotamian kind of mythology thrown in for good measure. I think I was pretty exhausted by the end of it. The book did get optioned by a production company, and I was invited to write some of the adaptation of it, and I did read the first two episodes, and it was interesting to see it happen. But and it's also happened with my first novel too, to actually adapt it, and we might talk about that later on. But it is I think one needs a bit of professional distance in time and space before you can go back into your own work and look at it with the cold eyes that you need. And I think, it's the same, and I imagine it is with you guys. When you are editing your own work, you need a real gap between the end and starting again on page one, and actually trying to be useful to yourself and the work.
Yeah. Yeah, and I've just gone through that. I've only just finished another manuscript. So that's my fifth novel. It's a 90,000 word manuscript. It's a crime mystery. Finished the first draft. Took a couple of months away from it. I sent it away. I've just had a manuscript assessment done, and the editor's just got back to me and has, after working on it for about 6 weeks, came back to me with the marked up edited version. Has been incredibly thorough. And now that I've had a bit of a distance from it, I can come back and look at it with fresh eyes and look at all her comments and recommendations to change things. And, not only just line editing, but structural issues and how it can add extra layers and backstory to characters and all that. But having that couple of months away from it and just to, do other things in life and come back with a set of fresh eyes. And now that someone has read it and given that feedback, now I'm ready to launch into it for phase 2. I've got the energy again. Whereas when I typed VN, I was exhausted and had nothing in the tank. But I feel refreshed and refreshed and energized to tackle it again now with a new set of eyes.
Yeah, it feels like you've done 12 rounds with Tyson when you finish a novel, for sure. And so you're vulnerable. You want whoever reads it at that point to go, it's perfect. I love everything about it.
Don't change a word.
Yeah, which is never what you hear.
It's never going to happen.
But you're not in a brain space to be receptive to even the most well-meaning and useful feedback. At that point. The very best thing you can do is go, I need a break from it and from this, and to do something else. And so when I come back, I'll be not only receptive to your feedback, dear editor, second only to the angels, but I'll actually be able to be critical of my own work and not so damn precious about it. And because I don't know, I know novelists who fall in love with their work, and I know novelists who fall in hate with their work, who can't find anything good about it, who can't find anything wrong with it. And what you need is somewhere in the middle where you can go, you know what, this is beyond good enough. This is pretty good. Can it be improved? Yes, it can always be improved. Yeah. But realistically, is it better to just keep licking the wound, or is it better to just go, okay, I'm happy and I can now move on and create something new now?
And just on that point, there was a point, it's probably a good segue into this, where we're talking about, what are the components of story, good story, and that sort of thing, storytelling. But there's a quote that you said, which I really like, and I've actually got it highlighted here, about the idea that's in your mind as a storyteller needs to sustain not only the story, but the writer. Can you elaborate on what you mean by that?
Well, I think that's, we're getting into what is the essential of story, and I think that's different for everyone. But in screenwriting, sometimes it's called the controlling idea. It sounds kind of wanky, but it's the idea of the what if that goes, wow, I would like to see that, or I would like to read that story. I'd like to know that story. What if a young farm boy on a alien planet realizes that he's a knight of old and has to battle, the most villainous person in the empire? That's the what if, and that is the idea that has to not only, track through the story, because that's the rocket charge that starts 90,000 pages or whatever it is, but it also is the rocket charge. It's the well that you have to keep dipping into over the 3 or 6 or 12 or 18 months that you're writing it, where you're struggling with all the self-doubt and you're going, this is rubbish, I hate everything, I can't do this. And you just go, no, I'm just going to write another, 3 pages today and then 3 pages tomorrow, and keep going, keep slogging on. It's that what if idea. It's the joy of the idea, I think. And maybe it's not an idea as much as a feeling. Some people are sustained by a mood or a tone or a feeling that they want to evoke in the reader. For some people, it's just, they have a line of dialogue or a line of prose that starts it, what's the start of Rebecca? Last night I dreamed of Mandalay again. Just something that starts and you go, wow, I want to see that. I want to follow that all the way through. So I think that's really important. But along every step of the way is not losing track of the sight that it's all about what if and what. It's questions. It's human curiosity that keeps us turning the page. The next question, apart from what if, is what happens next. And it's terribly important, I think, to not lose sight of the fact that, all of us are readers before we're writers. All of us are consumers because we're curious about what's over the hill. We want to know what happens next. So make sure that you keep asking questions of your reader through the work. And that's really difficult because we have to be clever enough to know the questions and know answers that they can't know, because there's nothing worse than watching something or reading something and knowing what will happen next. That's a surefire recipe for changing the channel, starting a new show, or putting the book down.
And I guess you mentioned Ray Bradbury earlier, and as somebody that you read a lot of his books, and I'm coming up with that one idea, that the Fahrenheit 451 that he wrote. I'm actually stealing his idea, and I'm writing a version where firemen, paramedics are the sort of equivalent.
Oh,
where
wow.
they don't save people, they actually euthanize people. So it's a sort of tongue-in-cheek version of his book. So I understand that sort of idea of getting that idea and then having to just play it through the whole book and see where it goes.
Yeah, and one hopes that and this is the hope that sustains as well, if it excites you, it's got to excite someone else. Hopefully many tens of thousands of someone else's.
That would be nice.
but at least a few. And that's the vain hope that we travel under, that our ideas are good enough, not just to sustain us and a book, but also to, keep people reading for 10 or 12 hours or whatever. Yeah. So there's a degree of vanity involved as well, self-belief, because we have plenty of self-doubt, so we just need to balance the scales with a little bit of egocentric, and I think some of that comes from reading other works as well. We read the great stuff and, we go, oh my God, there's no way I could write, Indian Camp or something like that. But then you read other stuff and you go, that's crap, I could write better than that. In fact, I will. So, and we springboard off the low and we aim for the high, maybe.
Yeah, that's a great vision. And maybe now's a good time to segue into screenwriting, novel adaptation into screenwriting. And I've got a whole ton of questions around that. But first of all, Wake in Fright. For those people who don't know what Wake in Fright is, just a quick intro for anyone that's listening. So Wake in Fright tells the tale of John Grant's journey into an alcoholic, sexual, and spiritual nightmare. And these aren't my words; these are reviews. It's referred to as it's the original and the greatest outback horror story. Bundan Yabba, or it's known as the Yabba, and its citizens will forever haunt its readers. So the original film was made in Australia in 1971, but it's based on the book that was written in I've got the notes here, back in 1961. Yeah, Kenneth Cook wrote the original novel in 1961, but then the first book was written, the first film was created in 1971. Incidentally, there's another story where it actually almost got lost forever. And then it was kind of found and kind of rebooted in around the 2012. And I've got a quote here. Roger Ebert, who was a reviewer, he said, it's not dated, it's powerful, genuinely shocking, and rather amazing. It comes billed as a horror film and contains a great deal of horror, but all the horror is human and brutally realistic. So fast forwarding to, I believe, 2017, you rewrote a reimagining of that story, and it was released as a two-part series. So I'm really interested in how that came about. Can you talk us through that?
Well, it's a beloved and respected work, both as a novel. I don't know if it's on school curricula anymore. It was certainly very well known, and yeah, it was the definitive masculine Australian horror. And Ted Kolchak, who I think is Canadian, directed the 1971 adaptation with Jack Thompson in the lead as John Grant. I didn't watch that, but I'll circle back to that in a second. It's another one of those connections things. Some years prior to that, I was just putting my hand up for anything that I could do that was in the screenwriting world, because I still wanted to be a feature writer. So I went to some federally funded workshops and stuff, and I happened to just sit next to a producer. I was the only writer in the room. This was a workshop on reading screenplays, how to read a screenplay, which you would be surprised. You go, surely anyone can do that. No, they can't. It's amazing. You know, you see some of the rubbish that's made and you go, yeah, there must be a lot of studio executives that don't know how to read screenplays. So this was a critique on, you know, screen analysis. And next to me was an up-and-coming producer, and he and I just got on really well. His name's Christian Moliere. And we just kept in touch, and we liked one another. I certainly liked him. I think he liked me. We kept in touch. He lives in Adelaide. I live in Brisbane. He went on to produce a feature film called The Babadook.
Yeah, I've seen that.
And I went on to, you know, other things like Secrets and Lies and so forth. And so he pitched with a compatriot of his, a director called Chris Stenders. He pitched this idea of remaking the novel set in the present to Network 10, partnering with a production company called Lingo. Helen Bowden and Jason Stevens are the principals of Lingo, and they've gone on to do some fantastic work. So I was suggested as the writer. Christian, you know, said, you know, Stephen's done this, he's done Secrets and Lies, and fortunately it's the same network, Network 10, who, even though it didn't rate particularly well, people really seemed to like Secrets and Lies, including the head of drama then. And so I got the gig, and so went down there and had a listen. And it was like, well, it's going to be a 2x2 hour mini series. And that was like, oh, okay. Because the feature was, you know, 90 minutes. So we basically got to come up with as much story again out of this very slim little novel. So I didn't look at the Ted Kolchak film. I didn't rewatch it at all. I just went straight back to the source material. And, you know, we talked it out in the room about mood and tone and the fact that it was on a free-to-air network. What's going to be palatable, what's unpalatable. There's a sequence in the book and the film, which is a kangaroo cull shoot, a drunken shoot. And we went, well, we can't really be shooting native animals. What do we do there? So there was a lot of discussion, but I was given an enormous amount of latitude to do what I thought was best. And it was really delightful. So for me, it was reading and rereading the source work. and going, well, what is it about this that's engaging and interesting? It's about this. It's about a school teacher who's not a manly man, who ends up in this, this hell of a town where heavy drinking and danger and violence is constantly underpinning everything. But there's also, a sense of mystery about it, which is, what is it about this place? An almost hauntedness to it, which I loved, being a ghost novelist. So, and being able to, come up with extra backstory that could manifest through the two pieces, was really great. So, it was a collaborative and creative process, but I was really allowed a lot of latitude, and the characters that Kenneth Cook had written were very strong. Bringing them into the present from 1961, forward 60 years plus, making it interesting and relevant, and also trying to go, well, how can we have women's voices in this? The women in it was Kenneth Cook was quite young when he wrote it, and the women in the novel are not deeply observed characters. But there was a great deal of room to dig into some of the characters. So, at least one of the antagonists, who was male in the novel, we made female in this.
And I was going to comment on that. Sorry to interrupt. I was going to comment on that was one of my observations, that clearly I could tell that you were balancing staying true to the original sort of atmosphere of the story, particularly the 1971 film version. So you were still staying true to that. Even some of the cinema effects in the intro, at the beginning of the movie, when you got the outback train station and scanning around the environment, and it seemed to me that you captured a lot of that atmosphere, the atmospheric conditions, but it had this very modernized flavor to it. And one of those I felt it significantly I wouldn't say changed it, but it added an extra layer to it. Having a very strong female, would you say, I don't know whether you'd call her a villain. She probably wasn't as villainous when you discover a little bit more about her towards the end of the story, but she was certainly an antagonist. So that was quite a significant shift.
Yeah, and it was fun to do, and a great actor in the role. And we wanted the sense of crime and violence and danger to be present and sustainable, which there isn't a whole lot of it in the novel. He loses his money playing two up, and basically that's it. He can't afford his way home. We put in raising the stakes a little bit, and making the debt that he owes more acutely wanted back by the villainous pair, who also happen to be dabbling in cooking meth.
Yeah. Well, that's definitely bringing it into the present day, isn't it?
Yeah,
country towns with meth.
We try not to make a huge deal of it. I think what was more satisfying, even so for me, was the semi femme fatale that John Grant kind of falls in lust with, and that she is enigmatic enough to be another face to the mystery of the town. Like, who is this person? Why is she here? She ends up being, revealed to be a nurse in the town. So it was really fun to, refer back tonally to some of these, great mysteries. I know the director, Kriv, had seen the 1971 version, and of course loved it. They probably wouldn't have been interested in remaking it had they not loved it. But also, for me, it was, how do we tap into other strangers in a strange land, fish out of water stories like Body Heat, which is a favorite with Kathleen Turner, where you've got someone who's being played and doesn't know it. Being versed in great cinema, even more than great television, was helpful for this, because we just saw it basically as two films back to back, rather than one long story.